Welcome to this Sabbath afternoon study from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, USA. Amazing and revolutionary was the opening study of this series 50. Today, December the 9th, 2023, I will reveal more evidence to show that Christ has installed a heretofore secret battalion of human agents in his heavenly abode on the red cloud of Jupiter. Human agents, I say. Some, like Enoch, were over 5,000 years ago taken up to become Christ's operatives. Perhaps as many as 300,000 men and women are his covert CIA evangelists, which, by the way, is the title of this series 50. They now await the harvest of earth to become fully deployed under our management. CIA, let me remind you, is an acronym for Celestial Intel Agencia. My ministry, the Mustard Seed Chronicle, is the capstone of their graduation in theology. In other words, they must consume this meat. Accordingly, do we have the title of the second study of this series. It is, quote, Meat in My Storehouse. We on this planet are the laborers enlightened by the Son of David to teach man, and I am funded by the Lord's tithe. Hence, the theme of our labor. Basically, the tithe comes by our work, the wages from which we earn so as to give a tenth to God. People of trite cliche have often said that God does not need my money. This is a false presumption which exposes man's intellectual density, his dullness of hearing. He needs your money to help you by validating your election. Meaning, tithers, by their sacrifice, prove to the universe that they are joyous and willful investors in Father's kingdom. And by their charity, they refute Satan's counterclaim that man has no zeal to advance Christ's authority. Satan also asserts that it is unjust to replace him because men love his dominion and have vested no sweat equity or work to unseat his power. Our tithing refutes that claim. So it may not be too late. You can heed Paul's appeal and join this labor force. Step up now and become a successful investor. Then you will become a divine entrepreneur. Malachi makes this very appeal when he gives the following prompting. Bring all the tithe into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. And prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. Malachi chapter 3, verse 10. Such is the efficacy of tithe. Like as was Peter, we become partners of Christ, elevating us above our brethren, even above the Enochians. That's right, the saints that he has translated to his house on the red cloud of the planet Jupiter will become our subordinates over whom we will rule. Why? Because our tithe is our kingdom equity. It allows the house of David to broadcast doctrinal jewels without interference. In this way is the covenant of David fulfilled. It promises the following. And the word of the Lord came unto Nathan, saying, So shalt thou say unto my servant David, The Lord telleth thee that he will make thee an house. And when thy days be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels. And I will establish his kingdom. He shall build an house for my name. And I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 4 through 13. To build a house for his name is to teach the identity of Christ. For what good is the name Christ if you do not know the personality to whom it applies? Thus, by this, your and my sweat equity is Satan defeated, and you obtain shares of the kingdom corporation. You do know that not the customers, nor the servants, not the government, but the investors hold shares of the corporate bounty. This is why God needs your money. It gives him the basis to endow you with planetary dominion. Thus do I fearlessly condemn Masonry without the sly use of cowardly code words used by others by use of the name QAnon. Yea, right-wing politicians, being Masons themselves, and thus afraid to offend Satan by virtue of their sworn avowal to him, seek to avoid culpability by parlaying their disgraceful affiliations onto their liberation-minded opponents under a technical shelter from his wrath by calling his, Satan's work, by a different name, QAnon. Thus Satan's house has become divided, but David has no strings attached. In this way are you, the devotees to the house of David, commanded to bring your tithe to the storehouse. The storehouse is the supply source for the Lord's house. Meat in due season is produced there that it may be delivered elsewhere, delivered to the house that Christ, the householder, has established in the very heavens. Thuswise can we discern that the house and the storehouse are mutually exclusive. The storehouse is the abode of the faithful and wise steward. It is a place on earth. This is further proven by Matthew 24, whereby that servant is found feeding meat in due season when Christ returns from heaven. Before then, evidently, Christ was not on earth, but his storehouse so was. It says, and I quote, "Watch therefore, for ye know not what hour your Lord doth come. But know this, that if the good man of the house, Jesus, had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his Lord hath made ruler over his household, to give them meat in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing." Matthew 24, verse 42 and 45 through 46. In case you didn't notice, this is a commandment. Ironically, religions today resist compliance by the claim that this blessed servant is a sheep stealer. But is not that to be the very icon of his sign? He is called a proverbial thief. Why then do you resist that your heart be stolen by his work? Instead of heeding the command, your attention has been diverted. You look to the Old Testament, to the work of Paul, to the writings of V.T. Houghton and E.G. White, all righteous sources, but which were never ordained to supersede the commandments which Father was to give to us by use of the lips of Jesus. So failing to rightly divide the word of truth, you have become soaked in heresies, such as the writings of the Apocrypha, of the Talmud. And can you believe it? Some Hebrew Israelites even accessed the Book of Mormon and the writings of Joseph Smith, writings which he directly borrowed from the works of hell, or from Masonry. And some suggest that he was executed as a result. None of these works, seeing that they cannot reveal the name of the Lord, which is the very key of David, can win for them membership in the kingdom. It gets worse. They take evil to the second derivative, and by their pride, preclude even their loved ones, their sheep from entering therein. Thus they, and not Christ, are guilty of the slaughter of their own women and children. And why have they failed? Because they did not watch as they were so commanded. Now we must advance the doctrine further to note that Father's house is not even the same as Christ's house. The difference is that Father claims the universe as his domain. That is the universe, with earth as the only exception. Father's 6,000-year goal and Christ's very commission is to unite our planet into his, Father's domain. Our solar system then is not yet part of Father's domicile. In essence, Christ's mission is to quell rebellion on earth against his Father's throne. Christ said, and I need to remind you that during his 3.5 years of ministry, he, Christ, hid himself on Jesus per the specs of the covenant, and so vested he spoke not his own, but Father's words to affirm earth's status in God's house. The record of Matthew gives us validation, he states for us. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Matthew chapter 5, verses 34 and 35. If heaven is God's throne and earth is his footstool, then one cannot be the same as the other. Thus, if earth is his footstool, then it is not under the domain of his seat, his throne. And to boot, Father recognizes Jerusalem to have yet another pre-specified designation in this trichotomy. It is neither God's throne nor his footstool. It is the city of the Son of David, the great king, he whom Christ promised will have his throne established forever. And that day we will become inculcated into Father's throne so that we, the tithers, may rule earth. In synopsis, this perspective, future community, is the very work of Christ, uniting heaven and earth. Thus did he journey to the red cloud of the planet Jupiter, professedly to go and prepare a place for us. This is a promise of equal status in God's house. It is a pledge to integrate earth into Father's community of many mansions. Father's house, then, can be likened, if we need an illustration, to New York City, a domicile with many estates. And each of those estates, planets, is further subdivided into separate dwellings or apartments. Again, each mansion is a separate planet with subdwellings to accommodate their own ethnic diversity. Christ's mission, then, is to inculcate Earth with her own diverse ethnicities into the community of Father's other skyscrapers. As proof, Christ at Father's command told us, "In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there may ye be also. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me." John chapter 14, verses 2 through 6. Consider the example of a fictitious planet, a planet that I'm just going to make up now, since we don't have information about the other planets out there. Let us call it Listeria. I know that sounds like a bacteria. but for lack of a better word, that's the name that we'll call it. Listeria revolves around a distant star. It has many diverse beings on it. It is thus a mansion in Father's house. And her separate nations, tongues, and people each have a room in Listeria's mansion, her apartment building. Earth is to become like her. Back to reality. Each of Father's mansions has one planetary manager or king, also known as a landlord. Revelation is the book that describes the transformation of earth into such a mansion. We can see this theme by requoting what was already learned. Speaking of Jesus, it says of these Enochians, and they sung a new song, saying, Thou art worthy to take the book and open the seals thereof, for thou wast slain and hast redeemed us to God by thy blood out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation, and hast made us unto our God kings and priests, and we shall reign on the earth. Revelation chapter 5, verses 9 and 10. The distinctive kindreds of people and nations, in essence, seek their dwelling units in earth's mansion. The same applies to every other nation of diversity. Their rulership will fall under the dominion of David's throne, the city of the great king. Consider an example. I can cite to you by some mistaken notions that the Hebrew Israelites embarrassingly assert in order to win a following, I guess, among the Jamaicans and the Cubans. They claim that Jamaicans and Cubans stem from one of the 12 tribes of Israel. In this, they are infected by Jewish arrogance, the notion that God only loves the Hebrews, whom they call the Jewish people, and against his very own word, declare both in the Old and New Testament alike that he does not love the Gentiles, and that though God has room for sheep and cattle, as we find in many places, especially Zechariah chapter 2, but he has no room in earth's mansion for Gentiles. Even more absurd, they presume the blackness of complexion, whatever that means, to be the determining standard. This they do in ignorance of the fact that David was a man after the Lord's own heart, and he had a ruddy skin tone, per 1 Samuel 16. They condemnably walk after the flesh and not the spirit. To the contrary, and per David's record, these Enochians span all generations of human existence on earth. Back to the Caribbean islands, before the Spanish conquest of Cuba, it contained no black people. Instead, the indigenous people were the Taino and the Guanahatabe. Thus, when Christ returns with many crowns, as promised in Revelation chapter 19, verse 12, he can ordain a ruler for the Cuban abode within David's apartment house, his mansion, and make his selection from one of her two ethnicities, either from the Taino or the Guanahatabe, men who in generations past therein abode. Such is the meaning of the symbolic beasts, who come from every kindred, tongues, and people and nations. For Jamaica, it would be the indigenous Arawak people. These are Gentiles, as we learned from our last study when it was cited in Isaiah 49. The election to king in these countries comes by Christ's purveyance of honor to the one taken from that land, one of the many, who now, having meat from the storehouse, has attained full mastery of the mustard seed doctrine over their fellow compadres. Mastery of the meat that it has supplied to the Lord's house from your tithe. Again, he has nearly 50 generations from which to select. And when Christ has prepped the congregation of Earth's mansion, Jamaicans and Cubans will at most occupy 2 figurative apartments therein. The same applies to every other nation of diversity. For example, Ethiopia has 3 different indigenous people. Nigeria has 300. China at least 64, and still counting. England has several. Thus, for Christ to extract a king and queen from every nation, kindred, tongue, and people, and from each generation, such suggests that his house, as currently constructed on the red cloud of Jupiter, must contain what I estimate to be more than 300,000 saints. With the greater clarity now revealed, they are different than just angels. Being his clandestine operatives, or spiritual accountants and influencers on earth, I more carefully define them to be CIA, or his celestial intelligentsia. And David being heaven's lighthouse on the earth, then he defines for humanity the special work of Christ that he does on earth. Did not he tell us, if I bear witness of myself, my witness is not true. There is another that beareth witness of me, and I know that the witness which he witnesseth of me is true. Ye sent unto John, and he bare witness unto the truth. But I received not testimony from man. I have greater witness than that of John, for the works which the Father hath given me to finish, the same works that I do, bear witness of me, that the Father hath sent me. John chapter 5, verse 31 through 36. This is why we pay our tithe. It brings weightier meat in the Lord's house. But in simple terms, the Enochians can be considered to be angels of a different order, as we give an expanded meaning to that term angels. Psalms gives us even more clarity. And you must remember, Jesus super validated the book of Psalms, so we cannot dismiss its enlightenment as if it were a discredited book of the Apocrypha. David said of them the following: Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord, what did he say? O Lord my God, thou art very great. Thou art clothed with honor and majesty, who layeth the beams of his chambers in the waters, who maketh the clouds his chariot, who walketh upon the wings of the wind, who maketh his angels spirits, his ministers a flaming fire. Psalms 104, verses 1 through 4. David expresses astonishment about Christ's power. I say Christ, for he said in Matthew 22 that when David calleth him Lord, hence the emphasis on that term as I read the quote, he is speaking of Christ. Therefore, David is here not describing the Father's angels, but the men whom Christ transformed into spirits. For such to happen then, before their translation, they could not have been spirits, but merely flesh and blood humans who were morphed, like Enoch and Elijah, and as clarified downstream, the Samaritans. Thus do they, as Enochians, become the eyes of the Lord in the earth, agents who record human behavior and report it back to Christ. Do you recall Revelation 4 describes these spirits who were formerly flesh as the following? And round about the throne, 4 beasts full of eyes before and behind, and the 4 beasts had each of them 6 wings about him, and they were full of eyes within. A snippet from Revelation chapter 4, verses 4 through 8. Conclusively, then, to invisibly record human behavior is to be a secret agent for Christ, a spy. The same applies to every other nation of diversity on earth. To have eyes before and behind expresses that they are not naive. They know the path of all the special current events, at least in their own land. Also, their eyes are behind them, showing that they, as a collective body, are well versed in the history of their specific land. In economics, they would be described as a corporation that is both horizontally and vertically integrated. And more than that, they also have eyes within. This means that for the judgment, Christ relies on them to record the activities of their distinct homelands. In this sense, they are guardian angels. For example, the indigenous Arawak and Tanian people of Jamaica do not monitor the injustices of the Ainu people of Osaka, Japan. And now being transformed from flesh to spirits gives them full access as they gather intelligence, even in the windowless assemblies of the wicked. Christ makes mention of this when he reprimanded the deeds of one of the historic Jewish kings named Asa, because he took actions into his own hands and didn't trust the Lord. He points back to warfare in his own history of his dominion. And he said, "Were not the Ethiopians and the Lubans a huge host, with very many chariots and horsemen? Yet, because thou didst rely on the Lord, he delivered them into thine hand. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to show himself strong in behalf of them whose heart is perfect toward him." 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 8 and 9. For a large military garrison, in this case the Ethiopians and the Lubans, to, against all odds and expectations, be defeated by the smaller Judean army, means that Christ had to deploy not his sword in every case, but his human secret agents, his angels. And this he did by disorienting Israel's enemies in their war efforts. Such culturally sophisticated saints, beings converted from flesh to spirit, are his eyes. In this brilliant tactic, Father is preserved as an objective observer in the battle between Christ and Lucifer. Also, Father's angels, the cherubims and seraphims, also detached, can serve and help manage all other monumental issues in Father's universal house. Then, by their detachment, Father's angels, unlike men, need no atonement. The demise of Sodom reveals how the Enochians work with Christ to manage our planet. I'm sure you remember the story of Sodom, whereby the Lord received reports from his agents. Before the action of destruction, he personally came down to investigate the reports that he heard from men whom he converted to spirits. You may wonder, why did not Christ, by use of his all-knowing powers, have independent discernment so that he did not need the reports of any agents? He did not, because only Father is omniscient, and Christ is not the Father. Remember, he told us, "I can of mine own self do nothing. As I hear, I judge. And my judgment is just, because I seek not my own will, but the will of the Father which hath sent me. If I bear witness of myself, my witness is not true. There is another that beareth witness of me, and I know that the witness which he witnesseth of me is true." John chapter 5, verse 30 and 32. Christ is described as the Son whom the Father, according to John 5, endowed with power of attorney to act. And in this case, he used those powers on his Father's behalf. In this way, we are postured, according to John 5, to honor Christ as if he were God. Genesis 18 shows to us this transaction between him, his intelligentsia, and Sodom. The record states from Genesis, And the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which has come unto me. And if not, I will know. Genesis chapter 18, verses 20 and 21. His agents, by use of disinformation and as spies, recorded the works in Sodom. And back then, Christ wanted to double check the veracity of the reports. Thus wise did Christ teach you to pray, lead us not into temptation, and deliver us from evil. The point is made with precision by an illustration in American politics. Have you ever paused to ponder, how were the Christian evangelicals emboldened to wage their January 6, 2021 insurrection, hoping to reinstall Donald Trump to be the King of America? Have you considered that they were led into temptation by Enochians? Reason proves that it is impossible for Satan in this democracy, in years even before the primaries, to forecast the next American president. He only can hedge his bet by using diverging prophecies, giving him a plurality of winners that he can afterwards boast of his valor. With the mega Republicans, it was different. They, as lodge dwellers, were enticed to boldness by the opiate of a prophecy come true. When months before the 2016 field of contestants were in place, they received a prophecy that Trump would become president. And voila, it came to pass. Christ, by the deployment of his intelligentsia, obviously hooked them for their day of ultimate doom, thereby intoxicated with confidence in their prophetic gifts. They were trapped, so that Christ indeed delivered us from their evil. This, the humiliation of Satan's reign, was his mission since the fall of man. And the crescendo of hell's rule is vested in the mega confederacy. Thus, like a progressive insurance policy, he bundled them. He deemed that today in the harvest, he would send forth his angels to bind the tares, those who seek to choke out Israel, the wheat. I say he deemed to bind them into bundles that they may be burned. Their fire begins figuratively, yet the torment is real, even today. It speaks to the stifling anxiety about future ruin. Matthew chapter 13 says more, and I quote, He said unto them, An enemy hath done this. The servant said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather up the tares? But he said, Nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And in the time of harvest I will say to the reapers, Gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. Matthew chapter 13, verses 27 through 30, and verse 39. Here, according to verses 24 and 31 of the same chapter, Matthew 13, to burn is a proverbial expression. Heaven deemed to bundle and burn the King of America, Donald Trump, and his mega cohorts, to afflict them with unyielding torment. To illustrate the analogy or the sophistication of this application, consider that which was spoken of Jerusalem when their plight was described, which has endured 3,000 years. I remind you, Jerusalem refers to the leaders of not the Jews, but ancient Israel. Isaiah 42 says, But this is a people robbed and spoiled, They are all of them snared in holes, and they are hid in prison houses. They are for a prey, and none delivereth. For a spoil, and none saith, restore. Who gave Jacob for a spoil and Israel to the robbers? Did not the Lord, he against whom we have sinned? Therefore, he set him on fire round about, yet he knew not. And it burned him, yet he laid it not to heart. Isaiah chapter 42, verses 22 through 25. Now think for a second there before we proceed. How can anybody be burned and they not know it? Unless the concept of burning is, in this instance at least, used proverbially or figuratively. Therefore, I ask, can any deny the symbolism of burning to also be the plight of the mega Republicans? Nearly all his Trump's trees, making reference to Isaiah 10, now so suffer. More on Jerusalem's 3,000 years of torment. It was defined by Moses in his declaration to heaven and earth. He said, and I quote, in the morning thou shalt say, would God it were even. And at even thou shalt say, would God it were morning. For the fear of thine heart, wherewith thou shalt fear. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 67 and 68. Jerusalem's baptism by fire is now to be extinguished. The windows of heaven are open. Yes, the latter rain is their refreshing. The meat from this storehouse has been delivered to Christ's house, so that today Zion has attained a new level beyond Enochian counterintelligence. It is the emphasis upon the strict adherence to the law and to the testimony. Thereby, any prompting that you have, any intuition that you have, any voices that you hear need not be attributable to devils. They could just be Enochians, but their promptings no longer have merit because we are constricted to the law and to the testimony. It is just that we were too dull of hearing to appreciate his gems of light. So Father graced us with 2,000 years of interim theology. Essentially, the ladder was placed in the living room, awaiting David's day to replace the lofty and vaulted ceiling light. Thus, the test was always structured so that Jesus' testimony would be raised to us and explained in the last day. Contrary to the sophistry of Mormonism, there is to be no Bible addendum for the Latter-day Saints. Today, we must strictly comply with the law and testimony given to the Christian church by way of the disciples historically. After all, the testimony was not Christ's word, but Father's. To ignore them dishonors him. Yet even if Mormonism was the divine protocol, then we can bank on one simple thing. Man would ignore those words also, just as they have ignored this very publication, a work that is founded upon the genesis of Christianity, the testimony of Jesus. The law of Moses brings home validation of this very doctrine. He told Israel that he, Christ, would raise up a prophet like unto Moses, also known as Jesus, and he, Christ, was to install his words into Jesus' mouth. And by that installation, the world would next be judged. He spoke not of the Talmud, nor the Book of Mormon, not even upon legitimate works, such as those of E.G. White and V.T. Hotep, no, not even Paul, but on the predicate of whosoever will not hearken unto the testimony of Jesus, meaning by it all would be measured. To quote Moses specifically, he says, and the Lord said unto me, I, Christ, will raise them up a prophet, Jesus, from among their brethren, like unto thee, referring to Moses, and I will put my words in, referring to Jesus' mouth. It says, and I'll put my words in his mouth. And it shall come to pass that whosoever will not hearken unto my words, which he, Jesus, shall speak in my name, also known as Jesus Christ, I will require it of him. And if thou say in thine heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord hath not spoken? When a prophet speaketh in the name of the Lord, if the thing follow not, nor come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord hath not spoken. Thou shalt not be afraid of him. Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 15 through 22. This is the synopsis of the law and the testimony. So the words that Christ spoke during Jesus' 3.5 year ministry, and by the words handed to us from the book of Revelation, present the terms of our salvation. To honor them is to rightly divide the word of truth. They are testimonies that stem directly from Father. You can ignore all other prophetic pronouncements, for the indelible standard is the law and the testimony. Today is the only time in human history called the harvest. It is the blessing depicted in Revelation 1, when it says, blessed is he that readeth and they that hear. It is the blessing promised to be received by the ear of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Although this blessing yields everlasting life, it begins by the purveyance of truth that gives the understanding of salvation. But there is another catch. In preparation for the harvest, Christ gives to us the former rain and the latter rain in the first month, per Joel chapter 2, verse 27. Therefore, in this prophesied hour, all other heavenly revelations of truth, yesterday's former rain, are re-articulated with David's advanced light bulb. Thus wise did Christ hide the fullness of the light until now. After all, Christ did say, and this is the Father's will which hath sent me, that of all which he hath given me, I should lose nothing, but should raise it up again at the last day. John chapter 6, verse 39. Meaning the entirety of the gospel was to be solely installed in the ministry of the Son of David. He is not the S-O-N of the morning, but he is the S-U-N of the morning. This we are convincingly told in 2 Samuel chapter 23. And go back and read it up for yourself. This makes the test of salvation simple. Can man step up from yesterday's childhood and embrace today's the Star of David? He will relate to all the only aspects of yesterday's doctrines that in the day of refinement can now stand. And the only ones to so do are to be validated by the testimony of Jesus. One key point to bear in mind, yet not making the pronouncement too complex, the law of Moses, the writings of the prophets, and the work of David in the Psalms are all double ratified and certified within that very testimony of Jesus. Consequently, we now have the full meaning conveyed by Isaiah when he said, and when they shall say unto you, seek unto them that have familiar spirits, and unto wizards that peep and that mutter, should not a people seek unto their God, and for the living to the dead? To the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. Isaiah chapter 8, verses 19 through 20. Yesterday, men, even in their honest efforts, gave prophecies that failed. They failed because Father spoke in proverb so that David today can give the distinct honor of making Father's word plain. He, not Lucifer, is the single eye, that of which Christ spoke of in Luke 11. Thus, remember, he said, if thine eye be single, the whole body is full of light. Therefore, the entire planet Earth is enlightened because we ascribe to the single-eyed theology of David. Thus, even the word of an Enochian cannot nullify David's light, for by it the Enochians must thereby themselves be educated. The story of King Ahab gives us a perfect illustration so that we may fully understand the work of the Enochians. Ahab, in violation of the Lord's covenant, was a Baal worshiper. 1 Kings 22 gives the history to show how the Lord led him into temptation. Ahab, hesitant about his war plans, sought counsel from the 400 lodge-dwelling prophets of Baal. Confusion abounded for lack of a unified report. So the Lord desires to punish Ahab, use one of his, Christ's own operatives, to unify Ahab's false prophets, to bind them into one bundle, so to speak. The mega evangelicals are on the same path. The story reveals, and I quote, the prophet Micaiah said to King Ahab, the Lord said, this is Micaiah giving an account to King Ahab about why his prophecy, Micaiah's prophecy, disagreed with that of the 400 prophets. With that as a backdrop, let me start again. The prophet Micaiah said to King Ahab, the Lord said, who shall persuade Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said on this manner, and another said on that manner. So you could see the counsel, the consultation, the meeting. And there came forth a spirit and stood before the Lord and said, I will persuade him. And the Lord said unto him, wherewith? And he said, I will go forth, and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And he said, thou shalt persuade him and prevail also. Go forth and do so. Now therefore, behold, the Lord hath put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these prophets, and the Lord hath spoken evil concerning thee. But Zedekiah smote Micaiah on the cheek, and said, which way went the Spirit of the Lord from me to speak unto thee? 1 Kings 22, verses 20 through 24. Now Zedekiah is a different personality. Zedekiah was the lodge leader of Ahab's false prophets. He angrily punched in the face, not the unnamed lying spirit, but Micaiah, the Lord's on the ground, flesh and blood, true prophet of his deployment. The truth was told by Micaiah's vision of the Lord's work to manipulate Ahab's false prophets. Christ could not slay Ahab in battle if the 400 Masons gave a divided prediction. Such would allow Satan to hedge his bet so that either way he could say, I told you so. Outmaneuvered by the CIA, the lying spirit did a work of marvel. He, like the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, united the Masons so that they all sang their falsehood in perfect harmony. Any choir director can attest to you that such is a monumental job. Israel then, after Ahab was slain in battle, was devoid of excuse in the punishment that would be forwarded upon them for the next 3,000 years for their exaltation of Baal. Christ was justified to disband them and disperse them. The lesson is, in telling the truth, all of hell's wiggle room must be discredited. Then the universe can objectively discern the value of full compliance to the Word of God. Thus must his ordained, the Son of David, not even the CIA operatives, be honored above all other counsel, as he likewise presents the clear contrast between truth and error. Remember, the Lord says, And it shall come to pass, it shall come to pass, it shall come to pass, that whosoever will not hearken unto my words, which he shall speak in my name, I will require it of him. The time represented by the phrase, it shall come to pass, though it has taken 2,000 years, is now. The Holy Spirit has been sent, as promised, to remind you of the Lord's words. Your standing in the judgment weighs in the balance. Atonement will even cover the sins of Enochians. This, just as Revelation 5 and Leviticus 16 so proves. But men who trust in Ahab's counsel, the mega cohort, people who hold to their hearts the falsehoods of their own making, in other words, people who loveth and maketh a lie, will find themselves consolidated and trapped in their lies at the Lord's very hand. He has led them into temptation and will not deliver them from evil. They shall be burned. Why? Because it is not the voice in your head that whispers. It is the law and the testimony that is the final litmus test. Therefore, having paid our tithe, the Lord opened the windows of heaven to give us the latter rain. Its light, as was the case with the prophet Micaiah, relays to us the full gospel. Indeed, there is not room enough to receive it. Today, we may not possess silver or gold, or bright shine celebrity. Sorrows and cares in this old world, our lot seems to be. But we have the Christ, and he paid the price that wins us eternity. And Christ is all in all, to make us free. As we close this study, meet in the storehouse, we should note that the message of covert CIA evangelists requires more study. As we wait reward for our investment, let us absorb this study in anticipation of our next one, 50.3. And with that, we close.
Amen.